I'm an old radio person, so I do a lot of audio checking, and I want to make eye contact with people, even though that seems weird for a radio person, but it's true. I want to warn you, I have a cold, so I'm going to cough. It's disgusting, but I'm not in any pain. Don't feel sorry for me, okay? So I'm Sue Gardner, Mika said. Friday was my last day as the executive director of the Wikimedia Foundation, which is the organization that operates Wikipedia. I had been there for 6 years, actually, not 7. I had been there for 6 years, and it was fantastic. I loved it. But I had, for a couple years, been starting to feel kind of a creeping sense of dread. I felt like I was going into work every day and working really hard on some kind of beautiful tropical island in the middle of the ocean. And then I would hear storm clouds, and then maybe a military plane would pass overhead, and there would be an explosion somewhere on the horizon. I felt like there was a war going on, and I felt like being at Wikipedia, as much as I loved it, I felt like I was sitting out something that was really important. I was feeling a sense of dread. And so what I've been thinking about, and Mika is more optimistic than me, because he says, you know, how can we build an awesome internet? How can we build an internet we love? And the way I am seeing it is, how do we build an internet that we're not ashamed of? Maciej Segłowski used that phrase in Dusseldorf a couple weeks ago, and it stayed with me. What I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about what do we want. I'm going to talk about why I think we're not getting it. And then I'm going to talk about what I think we can do to change that. So I'll start with Wikipedia because I know it really well. We all know it fairly well. And because it's a really great example. Wikipedia, we all know, started years ago in Jimmy Wales' spare bedroom in Florida. He started this thing. People from all over the world got super interested in it and started to come together and build an encyclopedia. They did it in hundreds of languages. They've written millions and millions of articles. They are awesome. They are all really good quality today, except sometimes, but mostly they are really good quality today. And 500 million people read Wikipedia. 500 million people benefit from it. So that's awesome. The part of the story that is not as well known and that I think should be better known is about the money piece, about where the money comes from. I know that organizations' business models are super important for their ability to do the work that they're trying to do. Where the money comes from matters because organizations orient towards the money. The Wikimedia Foundation, gets its money from ordinary people. The people who read Wikipedia are the people who pay for it. So 2 million people around the world donate money to the Wikimedia Foundation. They are dentists and bankers and retired scientists and school-aged children giving their allowance. And they give $5 or $10 or $100 or whatever they can afford. What is beautiful about that is that it means that the Wikimedia Foundation is oriented towards the beneficiaries, the users, the public, the people who the projects are for, right? It lines everything up so that the entire organization is working towards that single goal. And it's very effective. The organization makes about $60 million a year now, which is great. So that's a big success story. I'm talking about Wikipedia because my program officer at the Sloan Foundation said to me a couple of years ago something that stayed with me. He said, you know, I'm so happy to fund Wikipedia. I think it's great. I said, thank you. I do too. He said, what bothers me about Wikipedia is that it's the only one. I feel like there should be a bunch of those, right? Like the top 10 sites, surely half of them should be things aimed at public service for the public good. And Wikipedia does feel alone. Like Mika said, it's the largest nonprofit. There are only, I think, 3 in the top 100 most popular global websites. That's a problem because, in my view, the internet wants to be like a city. And so this is Melbourne, which is frequently named one of the most livable, wonderful cities in which to live in the world. And you can see that Melbourne, like any good city, it's a mix of the private and the public spaces, right? There's obviously huge office buildings. That's the telecom over on the left. You know, if you were down at ground level, you'd see shopping malls and so forth. But there's also an aquarium down there in the front left. There's a cathedral over there, a town hall towards the front, and that's Victoria University right in the center. So a university, a city works because they're a mix of public and private together. The internet wants to be the same thing. My view is that one of the major problems with our current internet is that there aren't a sufficient number of public spaces. And many of the spaces that seem to be quasi-public or purporting to be public, or they're used by the public, they're owned by private interests. The private interests aren't aligned necessarily with their users or with the public, and they're not accountable to the public. So that's the problem as I see it. So I want to talk about why we're not getting what we want. And I'm going to tell the story of Yelp and LocalWiki. And I may be the only person in the world who has ever thought to compare and contrast Yelp and LocalWiki. And I'm sure that they have never thought of doing it, and I may be drawing some parallels that they might not agree with. But I think that they're kind of instructive, the two organizations, the two websites. Here's what they have in common. So they're both user-generated content sites, and they're both sites that connect people to the opinions of other people in the same area about the area in which they are, and they're both founded in 2004. The differences between them, primarily, is that Yelp is more aimed at the consumer side of us, right? The consumer part of the person. And so they can tell you, Yelp, where to get a fantastic cappuccino, or is the new grocery store any good, or how bad is the parking at the restaurant that you're thinking about going to. LocalWiki also does some of that, but LocalWiki focuses more on what I would characterize as the citizen part rather than the consumer part. So LocalWiki is focused on the parks, the libraries, the schools, have the ducks come out at the pond yet this year, what happened at City Council last night, and that kind of thing. So that's what they are. One big difference between them, citizen versus consumer, and the other big difference between them is money. So the big blue bar here shows investment funding that has gone into Yelp since its inception. It started with Max Levchin, formerly of PayPal. Then 4 venture firms gave money, and then they had an IPO, I think, 2 years ago. What that money has funded is expansion to 20 countries beyond the United States, so localization, internationalization of the user experience, and also sales teams on the ground. It's bought them investment in user experience, mobile. They've got great apps. They've got a really good mobile site. And it's enabled them to scale their infrastructure to the point where it's still pretty fast and pretty responsive at the level of the growing audience that they've got. If you look at LocalWiki by contrast, and here's the part where I will confess, you can see that red, right? That's because I tripled it beyond scale, right? I had to make it bigger so that it was visible, otherwise you couldn't see it. So LocalWiki has followed a path that is much more the ordinary, and I'm picking these sites in part because their paths are not unusual. Nonprofits get that kind of money, right? So $350,000 from the Knight Foundation, I think that happened in 2010, and $25K from Kickstarter. LocalWiki may have gotten more money since then, but that was the most recent information that I was able to find. And so that doesn't pay for massive global scaling, right? That has them with a staff of 2 people in San Francisco, and they are scaling, they are growing. They're in Germany, and I think a couple of other countries now too, but they're not gonna grow at the scope and scale and size and speed of something with tens of millions of dollars of investment. So what are the takeaways from these slides? I would say that there are 2, and I would say that the first one is nonprofit funding typically, regardless of your source, right? Whether it's major donors or foundations or something else. Nonprofit funding typically is not going to help an organization scale at the way that it needs to for the internet. Even the many small donors model typically comes after you've achieved a certain level of success, not before it. And then the second, and here I'm speaking more generally rather than specifically about Yelp, if you take investment funding, we know what happens when you take money from investors. Investors rationally want to maximize the return on their investment. That's their job. that puts you out of alignment, right? If you started off with an awesome idea, focused on your end users, providing a service to them, you take investment money, often what happens is you pivot towards the money, you pivot towards the return, and you end up leaving your people who you were originally trying to serve frustrated. So how do we fix this? And this is the part, when I give talks, this is the part where I frequently struggle because honestly, I am not an optimist. I am not feeling optimistic. But I feel like it's kind of crappy to talk to people and leave them feeling sad at the end of it. And so I do struggle to come up with something that is hopeful. But in this case, actually, something happened last week that made me actually really hopeful. So I have a genuine story of hope for you. It's the story of Metafilter. How many of you use Metafilter? Yay! It's so good. So Metafilter is super old school. It's been around for 15 years, which is, of course, forever. I've been a member since 2007, I think. It's a great website. It's people coming together. I think it's called Community Weblog or something. They come together, they talk about stuff that's happening on the internet, they talk about stuff that's happening in the media, and sometimes they ask and answer questions for each other. Metafilter's business model has been relatively straightforward. A one-time $5 user registration fee if you want to contribute. That is really just a speed bump for people who otherwise would be kind of drive-by trolling or whatever. It's not a really significant financial component for them, I don't think. But their main money has come from Google AdSense. And that's worked fine for them. They have a staff, they have always, for a long time, I think, had a staff of 8 people, 6 of whom are moderators, and then I think there is a boss and there is a web developer, and they've done really well for themselves. Until 18 months ago. And 18 months ago, Google released a change. What was that? Okay. Is that me? 18 months ago, Google released a change called Panda to the search algorithm. And that change was, I think, designed to penalize sites that had light content, I think spam farms. And it seems like, it's not entirely clear, but it looks like what happened is it accidentally caught Metafilter in its net. And so Metafilter started to get a lot fewer referrals from Google. And what that meant was their page views went down. And what that meant was their ad revenue went down. So they spent about 18 months trying to figure out, could they fix that? How could they fix that? What could they do to counteract it? And eventually, they gave up. And so last week, Matt, the founder of Metafilter, posted on the site saying, you know, I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to let some people go, and it's going to be a little bit crappier around here than it has been prior. And I read that, and I thought, you know, like, I'm an internet hobo. I will pack up my things and move on to the next sort of good, smart, literate community that I can find on the internet. Sucks, too bad, Metafilter. Other people behaved differently. And what they did was, within a couple of hours of Matt posting that message, they dug up the old PayPal link, which they had originally used to pay their $5 when they registered, and they started donating to Metafilter. I eventually donated too. I was not a leader, but I was a follower. And within, I think, about a week, they had donated, I don't know how much money, I don't know how much the financial total is, but 3,000 people, last time I checked, had donated, which is 3,000 out of, I think, a daily user base of 10,000, so it's almost 1 in 3, which is, anybody who works in fundraising knows, extraordinary, right? We would have killed to have that at the Wikimedia Foundation. NPR would kill to have that 33% of your user base donating. And remember, they did it for nothing. It is not tax deductible, right? They were not even asked to do it. They did not get a tote bag. They did not get any sort of special access to anything, right? They did it because they like Metafilter, and they like being there, and they wanted it to continue, and they trusted the site's owners to use the money properly. So that's the story of Metafilter. I pull out of these things that I have said and that I've been thinking about, I think 3 rules that support us creating the internet that we want. I think the first one is, like, build stuff that people will love, right? Like, build things for real people that they will find useful and helpful and that they will want to learn from and share with each other. Dark patterns don't work, making things sticky, you know, tricks to keep people sticking around. Just build stuff that people love. And then I think the second, and everybody overlooks this and it makes me crazy, pick a business model that aligns with your core purpose. Line it all up together. Thank you. It's like, you know, it makes me crazy when people build companies out west and the business model will follow, right? Because that's not how it's supposed to work, right? Like a pivot is a different kind of thing. You want to build something that's designed to fit, designed to make sense from the beginning. And then the last thing that I would say, I say this to you, do this now. If you love something, pay for it, right? We are going to get the internet that we deserve, you know? And Mika had quoted this morning the sort of aphorism, which is, if you're not paying for it, what is it? If you're not paying for it, you're the product, right? I think that was originally said by a guy named Blue Beetle on Metafilter, actually. It's truly in like 2006. And if we are not paying for it, we are the product. We have to pay for it. And we have to pay for it. Frankly, we in this room, we are the rich people. So we have to pay for it for ourselves, and we also have to pay for it for the people who genuinely can't afford to pay for it for themselves. We want to pay for it because we want it to be for you. We want it to be for us. We want it to be for the public. Thank you.